The sun was setting over the vast untamed plains of the ancient world. The wind howled across the landscape, carrying the scent of rain and earth. In the distance, a group of nomadic hunters, their faces painted with the symbols of their ancestors, made their way toward a great stone structure. The massive monoliths, worn by time but still standing proud, were a mystery to all who looked upon them. These were the ancient ruins, remnants of a civilization lost to history. "These stones hold the answers," said Varric, the leader of the hunters, his voice full of awe. He was a man of few words, but his eyes spoke of knowledge and power beyond his years. His people had traveled for days to reach this sacred site, believing it held secrets from the dawn of mankind. As they set up camp near the ruins, the hunters spoke in hushed tones, their voices filled with reverence. They knew that what they uncovered here would change their understanding of the world. The mysteries of the ancients beckoned, and they were ready to uncover them. As the night deepened, the hunters gathered around the fire, their voices quiet but filled with excitement. They had already begun to uncover fragments of ancient tools and pottery, signs of a civilization long gone. "These artifacts speak of a people who understood the land like no others," Varric said, holding up a chipped stone blade. "They knew how to survive in this world, and perhaps they knew something more." The hunters listened intently as Varric continued to examine the relics. He felt a strange connection to them, as though they were meant for him to find. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the campsite. "Tomorrow we'll venture deeper into the ruins," Varric said, his voice filled with determination. "We must discover what these ancient people knew and why they left these secrets behind." The hunters nodded, their eyes burning with curiosity. They had come seeking answers, and they knew they were on the verge of uncovering a truth that had been hidden for millennia. The morning came with a strange stillness, the air thick with the promise of discovery. Varric and his hunters ventured deeper into the ruins, their steps echoing in the ancient stone corridors. The monoliths loomed over them, their presence heavy and full of untold stories. As they moved further into the heart of the ruins, they came upon an enormous stone doorway, its surface covered with intricate carvings. "This must be it," Varric whispered. The doorway seemed to hum with energy, as though something ancient still lived within its walls. The carvings depicted scenes of strange creatures, celestial bodies, and rituals that seemed to reach beyond the earthly realm. Varric's fingers traced the surface of the stone, and a sudden chill ran down his spine. "This is no ordinary place," he said, his voice filled with awe. "These ruins, they are a bridge between worlds." The hunters stood in reverence, their hearts pounding with the weight of what they had uncovered. As Varric and his hunters carefully entered the chamber beyond the stone doorway, the atmosphere grew colder. The air was thick with dust, and the sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence. The chamber was vast, its walls adorned with murals depicting battles, celestial alignments, and ritualistic ceremonies. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, its surface worn smooth by centuries of use. Varric approached it cautiously, his eyes scanning the walls for any clues. "This place, it feels like a temple," he said softly. "Place of great power." He could sense that something important lay hidden within these walls, a secret buried deep in the ruins. As his hand brushed against the altar, a faint vibration surged through the stone. "What is this?" Varric whispered. The hunters gathered around him, their faces filled with both fear and curiosity. They had uncovered something far greater than they had imagined. As Varric's fingers traced the surface of the altar, a low hum filled the air. The hunters jumped back, startled by the sudden sound. The ground beneath them rumbled, as though something deep within the earth was awakening. The chamber seemed to come alive with an energy they could not explain. "It's a warning, Halder," one of the hunters whispered. "We shouldn't be here." But Varric stood frozen, his eyes wide with realization. "This is not a warning," he said, his voice steady. "It's an invitation." The stone beneath their feet shifted, and a hidden passageway revealed itself. "The ancients knew the way," Varric continued, his voice filled with awe. and now we must follow it. With that, he stepped forward into the passageway, the others hesitating for only a moment before following. As they ventured deeper into the unknown, the hum of the stones grew louder, guiding them toward a discovery that would change their world forever. As the hunters made their way deeper into the passageway, the atmosphere grew heavier. The walls of the tunnel were lined with strange carvings, their meanings lost to time. The passage was narrow, the air thick and stale. But Varric pressed on, determined to uncover the truth hidden within these ancient walls. "These markings," he said, running his fingers along the carvings, "they are not from any tribe we know. They must be from the ancients." Haldor, the strongest of the hunters, stepped forward, his torch casting flickering shadows along the walls. "What do they mean?" he asked, his voice low. Varric studied the symbols, his mind racing. "They speak of a great power, a force that binds the world together," he replied. "And the key to unlocking it lies deeper within these ruins." The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, but there was no turning back now. The passage ahead beckoned, its dark depths promising answers to the mysteries of the ancients. After what felt like hours of walking through the dark, the hunters emerged into a vast chamber. The walls were covered in ancient paintings, depicting scenes of celestial beings and mythical creatures. At the center of the room stood a massive stone pedestal, atop which rested a glowing crystal. The air in the chamber was thick with an otherworldly energy, and the hunters could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on them. "This is it," Varric whispered, his voice barely audible. "The heart of the ruins." He stepped forward cautiously, his eyes never leaving the glowing crystal. "This is what the ancients protected," he said. "This crystal, it's the key to everything." The hunters gathered around, their eyes wide with awe and trepidation. But before anyone could move closer, a deep rumbling echoed through the chamber, and the walls began to tremble. "It's alive," Varric murmured, his hand reaching out to touch the pedestal. "And it's waking up." The ground shook as the ancient crystal pulsed with a low hum, sending vibrations through the air. Varric stepped back, his hand still hovering over the pedestal. "We need to leave now," Haldor shouted, his voice rising in panic. The walls began to crack, and the paintings seemed to come to life, their figures shifting and moving, as though awakening from a long slumber. The hunters turned to flee, but the chamber was rapidly filling with dust and debris. "Hurry!" Varric yelled, leading the way back toward the passage. As they rushed through the narrowing tunnel, the rumbling grew louder, and the ground beneath them began to tremble even more violently. The crystal's glow seemed to pulse in time with the earth's tremors, and Varric's heart raced. "It's not just a crystal," he realized, his voice filled with dread. "It's a force, something more powerful than we ever imagined, and we've unleashed it." The hunters stumbled out of the collapsing ruins, their hearts racing as they breathed in the fresh air. Behind them, the once mighty stone walls of the chamber were crumbling into dust. Varric and Haldor turned to check on the rest of the group, their eyes wide with disbelief. "What in the gods' names was that?" Haldor gasped, his voice shaking. Varric didn't answer immediately. He stood still for a moment, his eyes fixed on the ruins. The tremors had stopped, but the ominous feeling still lingered in the air. "That crystal, it's not just a relic," he finally said. "It's a gateway or something far more dangerous. I don't know what we've unleashed, but we have to find out. The knowledge of the ancients is not meant to be forgotten." The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them spoke up. They had followed Varric this far, and now they knew there was no turning back. Whatever the crystal was, it held the key to the mysteries of the ancients, and they would uncover its secrets, no matter the cost. The journey back to their camp was quiet, each hunter lost in their own thoughts. Varric's mind raced as he pondered the consequences of what they had just uncovered. The crystal, the power it held, the danger it posed, it was all too much. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The ancients had left behind a legacy that was both powerful and dangerous. As they reached their camp, Varric gathered his hunters around the fire. "We've uncovered something far beyond our understanding," he said, his voice grave. "But we cannot turn back now. Whatever this power is, we need to understand it. We need to find the source and unlock its secrets. The hunters nodded in agreement, their faces solemn. They had come seeking knowledge, and now they had found something much greater than they had ever imagined. Tomorrow, Varric continued, we venture deeper into the unknown. There's more to this story, and we will uncover it together. The next morning, Varric and his hunters prepared to venture deeper into the heart of the ancient ruins. The sense of urgency hung in the air, as though something unseen was pushing them forward. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the landscape as the group set out, leaving the safety of their camp behind. Varric felt the weight of the journey pressing down on him. We must uncover the full story, he said, his voice determined. The crystal is just the beginning. If the ancients truly left this power behind, we must find it, understand it, and protect it. Aldor, ever the skeptic, eyed Varric warily. But what if it's too much to control? What if we awaken something we can't handle? Varric stopped and turned to face him. Then we'll die trying, he said. The words were harsh, but they were true. The deeper they ventured, the closer they came to the unknown. There was no turning back now. The deeper they went, the more strange and unsettling the ruins became. The walls were now covered in detailed frescoes, depicting scenes of warriors and celestial beings, their eyes following the hunters as they passed. Varric stopped in front of one of the frescoes, his breath catching in his throat. This is a map, he said, pointing to the intricate lines that covered the wall. It shows the stars, the constellations, but also places I've never seen. Aldor stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. It looks like it's more than just a map, he said. It's as if the stars are guiding us somewhere. Varric nodded. Exactly, we're being led, but to what? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as they continued their trek through the labyrinthine passages. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they were being drawn into the very heart of the ancients' power. And with each step, the stakes grew higher. The passage opened into another grand chamber, this one unlike any they had seen before. The floor was made of polished stone, and at its center lay a massive stone structure that resembled an altar. The air was thick with energy, and the walls were adorned with even more detailed carvings, many of which seemed to depict an ancient ritual. The altar itself was surrounded by symbols and objects that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. This is where the power lies, Varric whispered. We've found it. His voice reverberated in the chamber, and the hunters looked around, awestruck but uneasy. As Varric moved closer to the altar, he noticed that the carvings on the walls began to glow faintly. The deeper they ventured into the ruins, the more the ancient energy seemed to awaken. We are not alone here, Varric muttered. The feeling was unmistakable. Something was watching them, waiting for them to uncover the final secret. The moment Varric's fingers touched the altar, the ground trembled beneath them. A low rumble filled the chamber, and the walls seemed to shift, revealing hidden passages leading deeper into the ruins. The hunters stepped back in fear, but Varric remained still, his hand still resting on the altar. This is it, he said, his voice reverent. The power of the ancients, their legacy is awakening. The trembling intensified, and suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the chamber as a bright light shot up from the altar, filling the room with an almost blinding glow. The hunters shielded their eyes, but Varric stood undeterred, his gaze fixed on the light. It was then that he realized this was not just a power to be harnessed, but a force that would change the world forever. We have no choice but to see this through, Varric said, his voice determined. The ancients have shown us the way. We must follow. As the light from the altar slowly faded, the hunters found themselves in a new, darker space. The walls of the chamber had shifted, revealing a hidden door that led deeper into the ruins. Varric, his heart pounding with excitement, motioned for the group to follow. The real journey begins now, he said, his voice a mix of awe and fear. We've unlocked the door to the ancient world. They moved cautiously, the air growing colder with every step. The deeper they went, the more intense the sense of dread became. The stone walls around them seemed to close in, and the weight of centuries pressed down on them. Yet Varric pressed on, driven by the knowledge that they were close to uncovering something far beyond their understanding. The mystery of the ancients was now within reach, but the question remained, was it a gift or a curse? The air grew colder as Varric and his hunters descended deeper into the newly revealed passage. The walls, now smoother and more polished than the ones they had encountered before, gleamed with an eerie, unnatural light. Strange symbols were etched into the stone, some of them glowing faintly in the darkness. "This is no ordinary place," Varric muttered, his voice filled with awe and uncertainty. "We're entering the heart of the ancients' power." As they ventured further, the sounds of the world outside grew distant, leaving only the echo of their footsteps. The hunters moved quietly, their torches flickering in the stillness. Each step felt like a journey into another world, and the deeper they went, the more they could feel the presence of something ancient and immense surrounding them. "Stay close," Varric said, his voice low. "The deeper we go, the more dangerous it will become, but we have no choice. We must uncover what lies at the end of this path." After what felt like hours of walking, they reached a massive stone door, unlike anything they had seen before. It was covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift as they approached, as though the door itself was alive. "This is it," Varric whispered, his voice filled with awe. "This door, it's the final barrier." Haldor stepped forward, inspecting the carvings. "These symbols, they seem familiar, but they don't make sense," he said. "They look like a mix of celestial maps and ancient rituals." Varric stepped closer, his hand brushing against the cold stone. "It's more than that. This door is a gateway. Whatever lies beyond it is tied to the very essence of the ancients' power." With a deep breath, Varric motioned for the hunters to stand back. "We've come too far to turn back now. Let's open it." He placed his hand on the center of the door, and with a rumbling groan, the stone began to shift, revealing what lay beyond. As the massive door slowly creaked open, the hunters stepped back in awe. The air beyond was heavy with an ancient power, thick and charged with energy. The light from their torches barely reached the farthest corners of the room, but what they saw was enough to send chills down their spines. The room was vast, its walls lined with tall stone shelves filled with ancient scrolls, relics, and artifacts. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, upon which rested a large, glowing crystal. The very air seemed to hum with energy as they moved toward it. "This is it," Varric said, his voice a mixture of reverence and fear. "The heart of the ancients' power." The crystal pulsed with an eerie light, and the hunters could feel its energy in their bones. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, alive, ancient, and far more powerful than they could imagine. "We need to be careful," Varric warned. "This power, it can either save us or destroy us." The hunters gathered around the pedestal, their eyes locked on the glowing crystal. The room was still, the silence oppressive as they took in the enormity of what they had uncovered. "We need to study this," Varric said, his voice low but determined. "This crystal holds the answers we've been seeking. It's not just a relic, it's a key." As he reached out to touch the crystal, a sudden, piercing sound filled the air, and the walls of the chamber began to tremble. The crystal's glow intensified, casting harsh shadows across the room. The hunters stepped back in fear, but Varric remained still, his hand hovering just above the crystal. "It's reacting to us," he said, his voice filled with both awe and caution. "We've awakened it." The sound grew louder, and the ground beneath them began to rumble. "We need to get out of here," Haldor shouted, but Varric didn't move. "No," he said. "We've come this far. We're not leaving until we understand what this power is." The rumbling intensified, and the room seemed to close in on them. Suddenly, the crystal's light flared brightly, and the ground shook violently. The hunters stumbled, trying to steady themselves as the chamber continued to quake. "Get to the exit," Haldor screamed, grabbing Varric by the arm. But Varric resisted. "No, there's more to this," he insisted. "We've awakened something, but we haven't unlocked its true potential. We need to see this through." The The walls began to crack, and the ancient symbols carved into them glowed with an eerie light. "It's too dangerous," Halder yelled, but Varric pushed forward. The rumbling grew louder, and the crystal began to pulse faster, its light flashing like a heartbeat. The ground split open, revealing a hidden passage below. "This is what we've been waiting for," Varric said, stepping toward the opening. The other hunters hesitated, but one by one, they followed him. The world was crumbling around them, but they had no choice. The final truth lay below, and they would uncover it no matter the cost. The passage below was narrow and winding, its walls smooth and unyielding, as if carved by hands that had long since turned to dust. The hunters followed Varric, their footsteps echoing softly in the confined space. The air grew thicker with each step, filled with the scent of ancient stone, and the faint hum of something far older than anything they had ever encountered. "This is it," Varric whispered, his voice filled with a strange reverence. "This is the heart of the ancients." They moved deeper into the passage, their torches casting flickering shadows on the walls. "The crystal led us here," Halder said, his voice low and cautious. "But why? What do we expect to find?" Varric paused, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "Answers," he said simply, "and perhaps power beyond our understanding." The walls seemed to close in on them as they ventured deeper into the dark, the weight of the unknown pressing down on their shoulders. Whatever they were about to discover, it was something they couldn't ignore. As they continued down the winding path, a soft rhythmic sound began to fill the air. It was faint at first, but soon grew louder. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances. "What is that?" Halder asked, his grip tightening on his sword. Varric's expression remained unchanged as he moved forward, his eyes scanning the shadows ahead. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we're getting closer to something." The sound grew louder still, and the hunters' hearts began to race. The passage suddenly widened, opening into a large cavern. In the center of the cavern, surrounded by ancient stone pillars, was a large stone platform. Atop it lay an enormous glowing orb, pulsing with the same energy that had emanated from the crystal. "This is it," Varric breathed, his voice filled with awe. "The source of their power." As they stepped closer, the orb's glow intensified, casting a blinding light across the cavern. The air was thick with energy, as though the very stones were alive with ancient magic. The hunters stood frozen before the glowing orb, their eyes wide with disbelief. Varric stepped forward cautiously, his hand reaching out toward it. "This is the power of the ancients," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "This orb, this energy is what they left behind. It's the key to everything." Halder stepped forward, his face etched with doubt. "But what if it's too much for us to control? What if it destroys us all?" Varric paused, his hand still hovering above the orb. "We have no choice. We've already awakened it. We must understand it, or we risk losing everything." With that, he placed his hand on the orb. A surge of energy coursed through him, and he gasped, his body trembling. The orb's light flared brightly, casting shadows that seemed to shift and move. "It's alive," Varric said, his voice strained. "And it's more powerful than we ever imagined." The hunters gathered around him, unsure of what to do next. The orb seemed to pulse with a life of its own, waiting for them to unlock its secrets. As Varric's hand made contact with the orb, the ground trembled beneath them. The light from the orb intensified, and the walls of the cavern began to crack, revealing hidden chambers beyond. A deep, resonant voice filled the air, echoing through the cavern. "You have awakened the power of the ancients," the voice boomed. "What you seek will come with great cost. Proceed with caution." The hunters stepped back, fear gripping their hearts. The voice seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at once. "Who are you?" Varric demanded, his voice shaking but resolute. "We seek the knowledge of the ancients. We want to understand what you left behind." The voice laughed, a hollow, eerie sound. "Knowledge is not without sacrifice," it said. "But if you are willing to pay the price, The secrets of the ancients are yours to command. The orb's glow flickered, and the air grew colder. The choice is yours, the voice said one final time, and then fell silent. The hunters stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do next. The hunters stood in silence, the weight of the voice's words pressing down on them. What does it mean? Halder whispered. What cost will we have to pay? Varric looked around at the group, his face grim but resolute. We have no choice, he said. We've come too far to turn back now. He stepped forward, his hand still resting on the orb. We will learn the secrets of the ancients, and we will master this power. The orb's glow flared once more, and the walls of the cavern seemed to tremble. A pulse of energy surged through the air, and Varric felt a rush of knowledge flood his mind. Images of ancient civilizations, of cosmic forces beyond comprehension, flashed before his eyes. It's overwhelming, Varric muttered, his voice strained. But it's also beautiful. The hunters gathered around him, their faces filled with awe as Varric stood at the center of the orb's power. This is our destiny, he said, his voice filled with conviction. We are the chosen ones. The ancients have given us their gift. The air around the hunters crackled with energy as the orb's power coursed through Varric. His body trembled with the intensity of the visions flooding his mind. Ancient cities, forgotten gods, and cosmic forces beyond their understanding filled his consciousness. We are not alone, Varric whispered, his voice strained. The ancients, they saw the stars, they knew the forces of the universe. But there is more. He looked at his hunters, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. The crystal, the orb. These are but pieces of a much larger puzzle. Halder, who had always been cautious, stepped forward, his face pale. What do you mean, Varric? He asked. What did you see? Varric paused, his gaze distant. I saw the end. Not just of our world, but of all worlds. A force beyond comprehension is coming, and we are the ones who must stop it. The hunters stood in stunned silence, unsure of whether to believe him or run. But there was no running from the truth they had uncovered. They had been chosen, whether they liked it or not. The hunters gathered around Varric, their minds racing with the implications of what he had said. The end of all worlds? Halder asked, his voice filled with disbelief. How could you know that? Varric's eyes met his, burning with an intensity that left no room for doubt. I saw it, he said, his voice low and filled with certainty. In the visions, the stars aligned, and I saw the force that the ancients warned us about. It is coming, and it will devour everything in its path. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, each of them processing the weight of Varric's words. We've only just begun to understand what we've uncovered, Varric continued. The knowledge, the power, the orb. It's all connected. The ancients left this for us to find, and it's up to us to prevent the destruction they foresaw. Halder stepped back, his hand on his sword. And how do we stop it? Varric shook his head. I don't know yet, but I will find out. We have no choice now. We must follow the path the ancients set for us. Determined to uncover the next step, Varric led the group deeper into the ruins. The air was thick with the weight of their discovery, and the once familiar ruins now felt foreign and sinister. As they moved through a narrow corridor, Varric stopped abruptly, his hand raised. The others followed suit, their eyes scanning the shadows ahead. I can feel it, Varric said softly, his voice a mix of anticipation and dread. Something is waiting for us. They advanced cautiously, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. Suddenly the floor beneath them gave way, and with a loud crash, they plunged into the darkness below. The hunters cried out in surprise as they tumbled into an underground chamber. When they hit the ground, they were surrounded by a strange, pulsating glow emanating from the walls. Varric scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. This is no accident, he said, his eyes scanning the chamber. We were meant to find this place. The chamber was unlike anything they had encountered before. The walls were lined with ancient runes and symbols, each one glowing faintly with an otherworldly energy. At the center of the room stood a large, intricately carved stone altar, covered in dust but still radiating power. "This is it," Varric said, his voice reverberating in the chamber. "The final piece of the puzzle." He moved toward the altar, his hand reaching out as if drawn by an invisible force. "This is where it all began, and where it will end." As his fingers brushed the surface of the altar, a deep rumble filled the room. The walls cracked and the ground trembled beneath them. The hunters stepped back in alarm, but Varric remained still, his eyes focused on the altar. "The ancients built this to hold the power," he murmured. "Now it's time to unlock it." The altar began to glow, its surface shifting as though responding to Varric's touch. The energy in the room surged, and the air became charged with an electric hum. As the energy from the altar intensified, the hunters could feel the ground beneath them shift. "Varric, we have to stop this," Haldor shouted, his voice filled with panic. But Varric stood frozen, his eyes locked on the altar. "No," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is the only way." The glow from the altar flared, and a blinding light engulfed the room. The hunters shielded their eyes, but Varric remained unflinching, drawn to the light. "We have awakened the power of the ancients," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Now we must harness it or risk losing everything." The light subsided, and in its place stood a massive figure, its form made of pure energy and light. It was a being of immense power, its presence filling the entire chamber. "You have come to claim the power," the figure spoke, its voice deep and resonant. "But are you worthy?" The hunters stood in awe, unable to move, as the figure loomed before them, its gaze fixed on Varric. The towering figure before them was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a being made of pure light and energy, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. Varric stepped forward, his breath caught in his throat. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. The figure did not move, but its voice echoed through the chamber, as though it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I am the guardian of the ancients' power," the figure intoned, its voice like the sound of thunder. "You have awakened that which should have remained hidden." The hunters stood motionless, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. "What do you want from us?" Haldor asked, his voice shaking with fear. "The power you seek comes with a price," the figure replied. "The ancients built this power to protect the world, but now it is yours to command. But know this, if you use it, you risk destroying everything." Varric stood still, his hand tightening around the hilt of his sword. "We have no choice," he said, his voice firm. "We must unlock the secrets of the ancients." The figure remained still, its glowing form pulsating with an ancient energy. Varric took a step closer, his eyes never leaving the figure. "What must we do?" he asked. The figure's form flickered, and for a moment its face appeared, a visage of an ancient being wise and full of sorrow. "The knowledge you seek is within you," the figure said. "But you must prove yourselves worthy." Varric's brow furrowed. "How do we prove ourselves?" he asked. The figure raised its hand, and suddenly the chamber around them began to change. The walls shifted, revealing scenes of the past, battles fought by the ancients, their cities rising and falling. "You will face the trials of the ancients," the figure intoned. "Only then will you understand the true cost of the power you seek." The hunters exchanged nervous glances, but none of them hesitated. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The room seemed to come alive with the energy of the ancient trials. The air grew thick with a strange heavy pressure, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. "Prepare yourselves," the figure said, its voice deep and foreboding. "The trials are about to begin." The hunters gathered together, each of them drawing their weapons and taking a defensive stance. Suddenly the walls of the chamber began to shift, and the floor cracked open. From the cracks, shadowy figures began to emerge, warriors from a time long past, clad in ancient armor and wielding weapons of unimaginable power. The hunters braced themselves, but Varric stepped forward, his voice filled with resolve. "These are not enemies," he said. "They are the trials we must face, We will fight for our right to command the power of the ancients. The shadowy warriors advanced, their eyes glowing with an eerie light, and the hunters prepared for battle. The fate of their world rested on the outcome of this trial. The battle was fierce, each blow from the shadowy warriors shaking the very foundation of the chamber. Varric fought with unmatched determination, his sword clashing against the weapons of the ancient warriors. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained focused. He knew that the trial was not just about strength, it was about willpower, about proving that they were worthy of the power they sought. Alder and the other hunters fought bravely by his side, their swords flashing in the dim light of the chamber. But no matter how hard they fought, the shadowy warriors seemed endless, their numbers multiplying with each passing moment. "We need to finish this," Alder shouted, his voice strained. Varric nodded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Stay strong, the end is near." He pushed forward, slashing through the enemies in his path. As he moved toward the heart of the chamber, the figure's voice echoed once more. "You have proven your strength, but the final trial is yet to come." With the last of the shadowy warriors defeated, the chamber fell silent. The hunters stood, their bodies battered and weary, but their spirits unbroken. Varric stepped forward, his eyes focused on the glowing figure that still hovered before them. "We faced your trials," Varric said, his voice steady. "Now, tell us, are we worthy?" The figure's form flickered, its eyes narrowing as it regarded the hunters. "You have proven your strength," the figure said, its voice softer now. "But there is one final truth you must face." The air around them began to hum with energy, and the walls of the chamber shifted once more, revealing an ancient altar at the center. The figure motioned toward it. "This is the final test," it said. "You must sacrifice something of great value to claim the power you seek." Varric stepped forward, his hand tightening around his sword. "We're ready," he said. "We'll pay the price." The light from the altar intensified, and the hunters prepared to face their final challenge.